Is this Mrs. Johnson? Calvin Johnson's wife? The unfamiliar voice caught me off guard. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. Mrs. Johnson? My heart clenched as I thought about my late husband. Before I could respond, the police officer continued, Your husband has been rushed to the hospital after a traffic accident. My breath hitched. What is this person talking about? My husband passed away 2 years ago. My name is Zara. I am 34 years old and work in an office while raising my 5-year-old son, Noah. We live with my parents, who have supported me ever since my husband, Calvin, passed away 2 years ago. Before that, I had been a full-time housewife, dedicating myself to taking care of our home and child while Calvin worked tirelessly as a company employee. We had a simple but happy life, putting our son first and maintaining a strong relationship. I had no reason to doubt that our future would continue the same way. Then one day, Calvin came home with an unexpected announcement. I got an offer for an overseas assignment. I blinked in surprise. Overseas? Yeah. It's a 5-year contract, so I'd have to go alone. I glanced at Noah, who was still just a baby at the time. There was no way I could take him overseas with us. Calvin seemed to read my mind. I know it's a long time, but I'd really like to take this opportunity. Would that be okay? I hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. I understand. You can leave Noah to me. His face lit up with relief. Thank you. Since it's overseas, I probably won't be able to visit often, but I'll do my best to stay in touch. Though I knew I would miss him terribly, I decided to support his ambitions. After he left, I focused all my energy on raising Noah. At first, I thought I would be overwhelmed with loneliness, but my son was so full of energy that I barely had time to dwell on it. When he was a baby, he would cry through the night, leaving me constantly sleep-deprived. As he got older, he started wandering off whenever I turned my back for even a second, forcing me to keep my eyes on him at all times. Because of this, my conversations with Calvin became more difficult. With the time difference, he could only call when I was either putting Noah to bed or in the middle of making meals. So, most of our communication was done through emails, and on his days off, we would have long video calls. Before I knew it, a whole year had passed. And then, that Christmas, Calvin came home. How's the overseas assignment? I asked as we sat together after he arrived. He let out a small laugh. Honestly, my head feels like it's going to explode from all the new things I have to learn. But it's fulfilling, so I'll keep pushing through. I smiled. Just don't push yourself too hard. Thanks. His gaze softened as he looked at Noah. Wow, he's grown so much. We haven't been able to talk much on the phone lately. Before I could respond, Noah suddenly pointed at Calvin and called out, Papa. Calvin's eyes widened. Oh, did he just say it? I nodded. Yeah, for the first time. Overcome with joy, we both made a huge fuss over it. For the next 2 weeks, we made the most of our time together, visiting both sets of parents, playing with Noah, and simply enjoying each other's company. But all too soon, the day came for Calvin to leave again. As Noah and I stood at the airport, watching him disappear through the departure gates, I swallowed my sadness and told myself to stay strong. I would endure this until we could meet again. Life without him felt lonely at first. But as Noah grew, I became busier than ever. He had started talking more, running around the house, and exploring every little thing he could get his hands on. I had to be even more watchful, making sure he didn't wander off into trouble. With all the chasing after him I had to do, I burned through so many calories that I actually became thinner than before my pregnancy. Before I knew it, another year had passed. And with Christmas approaching, I assumed Calvin would come home again, just like he did last year. But in early December, I received a message from him. Sorry, work is really hectic. I don't think I can make it home for Christmas. My heart sank. I had not seen my husband for a whole year, and lately, our video calls had become more and more infrequent due to his workload. I had been enduring the distance, telling myself that we would at least see each other for Christmas. But now, even that was not happening. I forced myself to type out a simple response. I see, but if it's for work, it can't be helped. Though I tried to sound understanding, I could not shake the overwhelming loneliness that settled inside me. Still, I told myself that Calvin was working hard for our family. And since it was Christmas, I decided to take Noah to my parents' house. They welcomed us warmly, delighted to spend the holiday with their grandson. Seeing their happiness helped me push my feelings aside, at least for a little while. The holiday season passed, and the new year arrived. I kept myself busy with housework and childcare, and before I knew it, Noah had turned 2. By then, he was running around the house nonstop, his little legs carrying him from one adventure to the next. Every day, I would take him on walks, go shopping together, and celebrate every little milestone he reached. I cherished these moments. But while my bond with Noah grew stronger, my connection with Calvin only seemed to weaken. His workload was getting heavier, and as a result, our communication became less and less frequent. At first, I continued sending him emails, but when his replies stopped coming, I assumed he was just too busy. I didn't want to burden him, so I started sending them less frequently. And just like that, another year passed. Now, Christmas was approaching again. Feeling anxious, I typed out a message. We'll be able to meet this year, right? I hit send and waited, hoping. I sent my husband an email. Days passed. No reply. As Christmas approached, I kept checking my inbox, hoping for a response. Finally, I received an email from him, but instead of the warm words I had been waiting for, it was a short, cold message. Work is really busy. I won't be able to come home again this year. I stared at the screen in disbelief. 2 years in a row? I hesitated before typing my response. Are you eating properly? Are you okay? Even just hearing your voice would reassure me. Could we talk for a little while? I hit send, waiting for an answer that never came. Just like that, another Christmas passed without him. With no other choice, I spent the holiday season visiting both my parents and in-laws. Even though Calvin wasn't there, I knew his parents would still want to see their grandson. And they did. They were delighted to spend time with Noah, but I could see the worry on their faces. We've been trying to contact Calvin too, my mother-in-law admitted, but he barely responds. When he does, he only sends short messages like okay or I understand. That's it. Her voice trembled with concern. It wasn't just me. His own parents had barely been able to communicate with him. A sense of unease settled in my chest. Something didn't feel right. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any stranger, something happened that shattered my world completely. One afternoon, I received an unexpected phone call. Hello, is this Mrs. Johnson? It was a representative from my husband's company. Something about their tone made my stomach drop. Please stay calm as you listen to this. A cold chill ran down my spine. We've just received word from our overseas branch that your husband has passed away. For a moment, my mind refused to process what I had just heard. What? It didn't make sense. What do you mean? The voice on the other end hesitated before explaining. Apparently, Calvin had gone snorkeling with a coworker to take a break from work. At some point, his colleague had returned to shore, but Calvin had stayed in the water to swim a little longer. That was when it happened. He had been so focused on swimming that he hadn't noticed the shark approaching. By the time anyone realized what was going on, it was already too late. A rescue boat had spotted evidence of an attack in the area where he had been swimming. I felt my entire body go numb. No, I whispered. This had to be some kind of mistake. There was no way. But his colleague, the person who had been with him, confirmed it. It was real. Calvin was gone. I immediately informed my in-laws. The moment I told them, their faces turned pale, and they collapsed to their knees in grief. The following day, Calvin's company sent a supervisor to apologize. But because the accident had occurred during his personal time, the company wasn't legally responsible for anything. I couldn't even bring myself to be angry at the supervisor. What was there to blame? The ocean? The shark? None of it changed the fact that my husband was dead. A funeral was held. But with no body to bury, we were left with nothing but memories. Instead of a casket, we each placed meaningful items inside an empty coffin. Noah had just turned 3 at the time. Too young to understand the concept of death, he became restless at the funeral, crying from the unfamiliar tension in the room. My mother-in-law's sister, always thoughtful, took him outside to calm him down. While my in-laws mourned the loss of their son, my heart ached for a different reason. I wasn't just grieving Calvin's death. I was mourning the fact that I had to raise our son without him. And because his body had never been recovered, he was legally considered missing, not deceased. That meant I wasn't eligible to receive survivor's benefits. I had to find work. Fast. My parents, seeing how overwhelmed I was, urged me to move back home with them. At first, I hesitated. The thought of leaving the apartment Calvin and I had lived in was painful. But for Noah's sake, for his education and stability, I knew it was the right decision. After packing up, I let my in-laws take Calvin's belongings while I moved back into my parents' home. Then, I immediately started job hunting. Luckily, my previous work experience helped. A small company near my parents' house took me in as a contract employee, with the possibility of becoming full-time based on my performance. I was beyond grateful. I threw myself into my work, determined to provide for Noah. But there were moments when the grief hit me out of nowhere. I would be in the middle of something, and suddenly my chest would tighten, and tears would spill down my cheeks for no reason at all. But I wiped them away and kept going. I had to be strong. For Noah. With my parents' support, I adjusted to my new life as a single mother. Days turned into months. Months turned into years. And before I knew it, 2 years had passed. Life had settled into a steady rhythm. Work was going well, and a few months ago, I had finally been promoted to a full-time employee. The salary was better. The benefits were stable. For the first time since Calvin's death, I felt like I had finally found my footing. Then, one day, I got a call. "Hello, this is the police department." I froze. "The police? Is this Mrs. Johnson? Calvin Johnson's wife?" The word sent a jolt through my body. For a moment, I thought I had misheard. "Mrs. Johnson?" I barely had time to process it before the officer continued. "Your husband has been rushed to the hospital after a traffic accident." Everything around me seemed to stop. "What?" My pulse pounded in my ears. "What are you talking about? My husband passed away 2 years ago." The officer hesitated. "I see." A beat of silence passed. "Well, ma'am, we checked the personal belongings of the person we transported, and on his driver's license, the emergency contact listed was your phone number." My breath caught. "What?" Nothing made sense. The name the officer had mentioned, it was definitely my husband's name. Which meant the man in the hospital had Calvin's driver's license. A deep, unsettling feeling curled in my stomach. I had to see for myself. I grabbed my keys and headed straight for the hospital. It was unmistakable. The man lying in the hospital bed was definitely my husband. I couldn't believe my eyes. How is this possible? My husband is supposed to be dead. A police officer stood beside me, watching my reaction. Ma'am, are you certain this is your husband? My throat felt dry as I answered. Yes, it's him. But how? I was told he died. I was completely overwhelmed. Nothing made sense. How was Calvin alive? Why had he lied about dying? My mind spun with questions, but for now, there was nothing I could do. He had been seriously injured in a car accident and was unconscious. I would have to wait until he woke up to get my answers. But first, I needed to call his parents. The moment my in-laws picked up the phone, they were stunned into silence. When I told them Calvin was alive, they could barely process it. This has to be some kind of mistake, my father-in-law stammered. Are you sure it's really him? My mother-in-law whispered, her voice trembling. There's no mistake, I told him. He's at Central Hospital right now. They immediately said they would come to the hospital. After hanging up, I took a deep breath and stepped back into my husband's hospital room. And that's when I saw her. A woman I had never seen before was leaning over Calvin's unconscious body, hugging him tightly. Calvin, she murmured. I froze. My pulse pounded as I watched the scene unfold. Without making a sound, I pulled out my phone and started recording. The woman, completely unaware of my presence, kept talking softly to him. I came back to this country with you so we could finally get married. She whispered, You said it had been 2 years, so surely your wife would have filed for divorce by now. You can't die before that happens, okay? My blood ran cold. I suddenly understood everything. Calvin had faked his own death. He had abandoned me, abandoned his parents, abandoned our son, all to be with her. The weight of it crashed down on me. The grief, the confusion, the loneliness I had suffered for 2 years, it had all been a lie. A deep, burning rage filled my chest. Just then, Calvin groaned and slowly opened his eyes. The woman gasped,